When I signed my deal, I found pressure. Don't wanna see the numbers, I wanna see heaven. You say, could you write a song for me? I say, I'm sorry about you that I believe.
Hey guys, this is Anime Wizard 101, and I'm here with the first chapter of Magi, and well, let's get into it. With the first page, we see this little kid. He's asking for water. And he runs into a group of guys asking like, "Oh, could you please give me some water?" And then one of the guys tells him, he's like, "Don't you know that you walked into a den of thieves?" And then they're like, the rest of the guys are like, "Oh, just like steal all his like stuff and like valuables." But then they see he's a little kid, so they don't think he has anything to give. And then you turn the page and we find out that he grows like these two huge ass arms, like super buff arms. And then I was like, what? Like, how the hell did like this kid like grow arms like these? Like, if he's been pumping iron for like years. And then so the arms I guess ends up beating up like the rest of the guys. And then he keeps asking for food. And then the guy's like, no, don't leave me alone. Like, don't eat me. He's like super scared. And then after that, we switch pages, and we move to a panel that says the Oasis City, Utah. And then there's a bunch of panels that just show around the city. And then I guess it's like a market or something, because there's like a lot of people selling food, a lot of stands. And then we're introduced to two new characters, merchant Layla and caravan leader's daughter Sasha. And then one of them is a merchant, so of course they sell like goods throughout the city. And then Sasha seems to be like really good friends with Layla, because she's like, oh, I'm glad you joined the caravan. And then Layla like blushes, and then Layla goes into the caravan to go get more of the products to sell. And then when she opens the caravan, she sees the little kid that was like starving to death in the back of the caravan, and he's like eating these it looks like watermelons. But it's so funny because like the author of Magi like describes little kid like, since he's eating like all the watermelons, he's like portrayed as a big chubby guy, and like it's just funny like and then Layla's like, who the hell are you? And then now we're introduced to the little kid more thoroughly. He's like, oh, I'm Aladdin, I'm a traveler. So I'm guessing he's the main character of Magi. And then he's like, oh, like all these red fruits really delicious. He's like telling them hi and everything. And then Layla's like, oh, like why are you eating our precious merchandise? Like, how are you gonna pay us back? And then he's like, I don't have any money. And then Layla's like, oh, you're gonna work for us for 3 days. So Sasha, Layla, and Aladdin go around the marketplace, like trying to sell like the merchandise. And then Aladdin asks like, oh, what is this called? And Layla's like, oh, this is called a bazaar. And then I guess in the bazaar is like a marketplace. And then Aladdin is asking all these questions like, oh, how is like a bazaar made? And then Layla's like explaining to him like, oh, like everywhere where you see rivers or oceans, there's like a city is made, and then bazaars are formed, which bazaars are of course the marketplace. And then Sasha explains to him how there's a lot of bands of thieves in the desert, and then they try to steal like the stuff from the merchandise from the caravans that are traveling through the desert, and then they sell the stuff in the black market. And then Layla asks him like, oh, how come you don't know any of this? Like, you should know this. I can't believe it. And then Layla seems to be like kind of stuck up because she doesn't really like Aladdin, and it seems like she doesn't really like him. And Sasha's like the more kind-hearted person. And then Aladdin tells Layla, lady, you have a scary face, but you care about your friends. And then that's kind of funny because like he just straight out says what he thinks. So kudos for that. And then they ask Aladdin like, oh, what are you looking for? And like he's like, oh, I'm looking for treasure, like treasure with my friend. And he's like, he explains he's looking for like lamps, anything that has to do with like metal. And then Layla asks him like, why are you looking for that kind of stuff? And then Aladdin answers, it's like, oh, I'm trying to help my friend. Like it'll make him happy. We find like these vessels or metal objects. And then he introduces his friend to Layla, and he's Ugo Kun, and there's like a flute, and it has like a star in the mouthpiece. And then he plays it, and these two huge arms again pop out, but they pop out of the flute, and then they just grab like the merchandise that Layla had like on her hand, and then like he comes back to the flute, and then Aladdin's like, oh, I'm sorry, like Ugo Kun, like I don't know, he's super shy of girls, of women, so he goes back to like the flute, and then Layla's like super scared, and she's like, oh, what are those arms? Like what are you, kid? Like who is this kid? And then in the next page we see these two random people, like they seem to recognize Layla. And then we move on to like nighttime, and then we go back into the camp, and then Layla's like about to like sleep next to Sasha, and she uncovers the blankets, and she finds out that Aladdin is like suckling on Sasha's boobs, which is crazy because, well, it's funny because he's acting like a little baby or whatever. And then Layla just like takes him off and like throws him aside. And then it seems like Aladdin is like bleeding, and then it's like she's like, oh, what are you doing next to her? And then it's like, oh, like it was very comfortable, she's very comfortable. And then she's like, oh, you're gonna sit next to me? She's like, no, thank you, like you seem really hard. It's like really weird and funny because like I guess she's strong or whatever. And then Layla explains that she's very thankful to Sasha because she saved her life when she was like in a desert, starving to death. And then she says that she wants to protect her. And then I guess Sasha overhears the conversation and starts laughing. It's a really long chapter, guys. Like it's like 40 something pages. Sorry if I take long. Then we like they're just like talking to each other, and like Sasha embarrasses Layla because she's like, oh, you're like my best friend, like I cherish you a lot. And then we move to the next day in the morning, and then they're about to head out, and then I guess Layla's like the navigator of the caravan, and then she's like the one that picks the routes, and she tells them to pick to go through Route 4 because she heard stories that in Route 3 there's like a band of thieves that's waiting for them. And then they're like, no, like oh, we should, but that's gonna take too much time. So they decide to go to Route 3. No, Route 4. And they're like, oh, it was safer than sorry. And then we move to another panel, and then Layla's like super surprised and shocked. And then there's these two thieves that show up. They're asking like, oh, are you Layla, right? And then they're telling her like, oh, how long has it? We haven't seen you like forever. Like, you actually survived. So I'm guessing she was part of like their band of thieves before. And then the people in the caravan are asking like, what's going on? And then they explain that she's a thief, and everybody's shocked. And they go to a little backflash, and she's like, she was a person that would play like dead, and then join caravans and steal like their merchandise from that caravan. And then so so the people in the caravan don't believe her anymore, so they decide to go through Route 3 instead of Route 4. And then so they leave, and Aladdin asks her, "Are you okay with this? Like, she was your friend." Um, and then Layla explains like every time this happens, like it's not the first time that this happens to me. Every time they find out that I'm a thief, they just leave me, and I'm okay with it. So it's not a big. She's like, "Oh, it's not a big deal." And then Aladdin asks her like, "Oh, do you really mean that? Like, do you really mean that?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm just go back to being a thief." And then Aladdin can't believe it. Like, "Oh, like this has happened more than once to you." And then like you'll die of sadness. And then he's like, "Oh, didn't you change?" He said that you told me that you decided to live without telling lies. And then the next panel we see Layla like just break down in tears. And then she's like, "Oh, it hurts so much." She goes down on her knees and like it's too late to catch up to them. They're too far ahead of us. And then Aladdin reaches out to her and she's like, "Oh, don't worry about that. I got you. There's a way." And then we move back to where the caravan is. We move up ahead, and we see that they're trapped. Like they're got ambushed on Route 3 by the thieves. And then they're like, Sasha's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Layla. Like, I'm so sorry." And then from the back we see Aladdin like Aladdin's head. And he's like, "Oh, I won't let you hurt my precious friends." And then we see it in the bottom panel below that like a huge body like built up a sprinter. And then you see like a big ass panel of this huge like sprinting body like with Aladdin's head. It's like so funny. It's funny because like a huge ass body with a small head, like a little bean head. And then all the guys in the band are like, "Oh my, like what is this? Like what is this? I can't believe it." And then they describe that it only looks like that, and the panel describes it that because if you see from a side view, you see that the body's coming out of the flute, and then Aladdin is just riding on top of the head. Like I don't know why the head doesn't come out of Ugo, but I don't know. And then one of the guys in the band explains that, "Oh, that's a djin flute." And then he also comes to say, "I'm sure you've at least heard of them. Djinns, the spirits that appear in all the legends. Everyone knows the tradition of sealing them into metal objects. So I'm guessing that's why Aladdin was helping. Oh, I'm guessing that's why Aladdin was looking for those metal vessels things, because they hold like the djinns in them when like you rub them, or like in this case you blow air in the flute." So I guess like the next panels he's fighting like the rest of the band of thieves, and it seems like if Aladdin like punches with his right arm, I guess Ugo punches too. So it's like some kind of symmetrical kind of thing, movement. And then Layla can't believe that only two people could actually defeat a whole band of thieves. And then we see Layla like very surprised, so she decides to like touch Ugo like on the foot. And then Aladdin's like, "No, no, 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 no! What are you doing? What are you doing?" Like Ugo Kun's very shy of women touching him, so he faints. He falls down and faints, and he goes back into the flute. And then he gets super mad at Layla because like, "Oh, why'd you touch him? Like, you tainted Ugo Kun's pure heart." And then the thieves are like, "Oh, it's like we caught a break." And I guess so Aladdin's like, "Oh, I have one more thing to do." And then he blows a lot of air in the flute, and the flute like seems to get like huge, and he throws it up in the air. And then the next few pages, like the people look up because Aladdin points up. He points up and he's like, "Oh, look up." And then the next panel is like everybody's like, "Oh, like what is that? What's that in the air? What's that in the sky?" And then it's Ugo Kun's body, but it's like humongous. He's like crashing down on the people. And then on the next page, we come to a place where it's like, I don't know, like some kind of like building, and there's a bunch of treasure, like a lot of metal things and a lot of skulls. And then Aladdin is in one of these panels, and he's like, "Oh, I want um I want you to." He's like, "I only have one wish," and I guess he's talking to Ugo in this place. And then we move back to the present, and then everybody's saved. And then we move pages. I mean, the next panel, I guess his wish was to, "I want you to be my friend." And then we move back to the present again, and then he's looking for all these metal vessels or metal things, and he's like, "Oh, be careful if you find a djin, because sometimes they're cowards." And then while Aladdin is leaving, he's like, "Oh, Layla, like make sure you don't scare any vessel djinns again." And then Layla grabs like genie lamp and just throws it at Aladdin. And then at the end, there's like this bulletin, and it says back at the market, and it says that another band of thieves was destroyed. And then that's the end of chapter 1. If you guys like it, please. I guess my question today would be, why is it that when Aladdin played the flute, only the body of Ugo came out and not his whole, like his head, like his whole body? Please like, comment, and subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys with chapter 2.